There is not a city planner who will ever tell you that they're actually planning for sewage. They will still tell you they're planning for water, however much they may not be able to plan for it. They still talk about water, but never about sewage. And yet we know that the amount of water we take in, there is a direct proportion and an amount of waste that leaves our house, 80%. So more water, more waste. Yet there is no account for sewage. Most cities have no clue how they convey waste, how they treat it, how they clean it. It's an underground business. It is nobody's business. And yet our city's plan of becoming New York, and I'm told Kolkata's latest dream is something else, I heard, something even fancier. Okay? Whatever. You can dream, but I would rate any city which cannot clean its sewage not worth its while. So you need to think about the dreams in much more real situation. And the maths of excreta are that you have you treat the sewage that is generated of all the class 1, class 2 cities of India. You actually treat about 22% of it. So officially, 78% of the sewage is untreated and disposed of in rivers and groundwater. This is the official Central Pollution Control Board figure for 2009. So in that sense, we flush and we forget. But this would mean that you would think that there is no problem. In fact, this is another small point of disagreement between us, though not substantively. Yes, we do need sewage treatment plants, but the fact is, every city, when it talks about sewage, rushes to build a sewage treatment plant. But it forgets the fact that if you build a sewage treatment plant, you also need a system to convey the waste to the sewage treatment plant. And yet, most cities of India, in fact, all cities of India, do not have underground sewage systems. So we have a backlog, and as cities are growing, like Kolkata is growing, you have a front log. More has to be created, and a huge amount of the backlog has to be fixed. And yet we somehow think that, there are pipe dreams that we will be able to deal with this. As I said, we've had the privilege of looking at 71 different cities, so we've actually mapped which city has how much underground sewage system. And only 4 cities of India, which are also disputable, Chennai, Pune, Surat, and Gurgaon, said that they had over 70% underground sewage. Gurgaon you can rule out completely because Gurgaon only talks about municipal Gurgaon and not new growth Gurgaon. So forget Gurgaon completely. Pune, Pinaki, you would know better than me, but I think it's a very unreliable figure. I go to Pune a lot, okay? Chennai and Surat are probably the only 2 who I would say would qualify in this range. But let me give you the story of one of the most interesting cities of India, Bangalore. Bangalore, in my view, has one of the better functioning water utilities. It actually has a reasonably good system of water charging, of looking at water and waste. Yet, if you look at it, Bangalore has currently 3,610 kilometers of sewage pipelines. Delhi has about 6,000. Bangalore has about 3,610. It has 14 sewage treatment plants with the capacity to treat 781 MLD. So, no problem. It generates as much waste it broadly has the capacity to treat. But yet, even in Bangalore, it only treats 300 to 400 MLD of waste because the rest simply doesn't reach. It has no underground sewerage network. It now needs to build 4,000 more kilometers of underground sewerage. Remember the first figure, 3,610 is simply not working. And this is leading to pollution because the system can treat the waste of a few and not all. And the end result is that we as a generation are becoming a generation of lost rivers. Mr. Narsim Rao talked about the river that he saw as a child. I think the most shameful thing for any society is when they can actually say they have lost a river. My own city, Delhi, has lost a river, Sahibi. It was a river which flew out of the Aravalis. Today we call it the Najafgarh Nala. We have forgotten that it was a river. The city of Mumbai had the Mithi River. It was a river. It was a freshwater river. Today, Mumbai officially calls it a Nala, a drain. Buddha Nala, 40 years ago, was a fresh-flowing darya in Ludhiana. Today, I'm sure any one of you who's been to Ludhiana will say, it is not worthy of being called a river. We are a generation which is losing rivers. And don't be complacent when you sit in Kolkata. You may have the Hooghly, and you may have your river which takes away your waste. But be very clear. You are making sure you make all the mistakes that the rest of the country has. And the question, in my view, is that this entire water and waste issue often comes back to the issue of who is going to manage it. Where is the issue of why can't we do infrastructure? Why can't we do PPPs? And everything will sort out. I per se have nothing against PPPs. I don't think that's the question. But I think in this sector, experience is very limited. And I think the current contracts, and I have taken very careful look at the current PPP contracts in water and sewage, I think these are not about these are about public investment, but private profit. They are not contracts that are going to work. And the reason is very simple. Today, the costs of water, sewage, pollution are too high. Recovery is difficult. The current contracts underestimate the cost of the system to build it, to refurbish it, to repair it. And the current contracts do not provide for sewage. And in this way, we will only have more cities that will drown under sewage. So what do we do? Quickly. One, very importantly, we have to learn to reinvent water supply so that we can cut the costs of water supply, we can reduce losses in distribution. And in that, more and more we need to invest in local water systems. We need to make sure every one of our ponds, our lakes, our wetlands, our houses are used for rainwater harvesting. We have to depend on local water systems because that is what recharges groundwater. Today, groundwater is used, but it is not valued. Land is valued, water is not valued. And in that, we are destroying the sponges of India. We are destroying the sponges of our cities deliberately. This is hydrocide. This is murder. And yet, remember, climate change is going to bring you yet a new threat of extreme rainfall events, more rain, but in fewer number of rainy days. You will need more sponges to capture rain to recharge for scarcity. So in that situation, this is a win-win. You invest in local water systems, you reduce your costs of water supply, you reduce your distribution losses, and you find a coping mechanism against climate change. You also, second part of the agenda, which Pinaki raised, which I totally agree with, you have to make everything more efficient, from agriculture to your flush toilet. We have been demanding in Delhi that, like the Energy Conservation Bureau, you need a Water Conservation Bureau. You need to be able to label appliances from water. I hope we will get it in the 12th plan. There is now a talk about it. The other part of it is you have to plan deliberately for sewage. I was chairing the 12th plan's urban water and sewerage chapter, and the one thing that I was really pushing for, and I hope I will get it through, is that in the next 12th plan, under JNURM, cities will first plan for sewage and then plan for water. So you will actually reverse the order of planning and thinking as well. So sewage will have to be our obsession. You also have to make sure that you plan differently for sewage. So instead of Kolkata thinking that you will build all your underground sewage systems miraculously tomorrow, take all your open drains and treat your sewage in open drains itself. Find technologies that you can reuse and recycle the water that you treat. This is where we need the imagination and the inventiveness of industry. This is where the most important challenge of India is, to redesign the sewage system itself, to redesign the flush toilet. Because if you treat locally, reuse is also possible locally. So you can cut costs of piping and pumping, you can treat with microbes, you can treat to reuse and not to waste. And remember the sponges that I spoke about, those same sponges which help you on climate change can also become water recharge points, can become waste recharge points. At the Amarnath Yatra, which is in very cold part of India, high Himalayas, they're actually treating sewage using microbes and very effectively. So the challenge is to redesign the flush toilet. At the end, I just want to say that excreta does matter. It matters a lot. But the most important thing about it is that if you can redesign and rethink this, then you can have affordable urban growth, you can have inclusive urban growth, and you can have sustainable urban growth. And you can have growth without pollution, which is really the leapfrog that India so desperately needs. So our common agenda is, please do flush, but do not forget that everybody lives downstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Used to tell us that committees are like toilet seats. First there's the sitting, then there's the reporting, and finally the matter is dropped. So excreta does matter. I think that was a very insightful and a very challenging presentation. The best thing about this conclave is that we always have had the privilege of having with us thought leaders who, through their work and practice, have profoundly influenced global thinking on environmental policies. We are proud to present to you Mr. Pavan Sukhdev, who, despite a surgery to his foot, has taken the trouble to travel halfway across the globe to be with us today. Mr. Pavan Sukhdev is more Indian than any of us. He prides himself in holding the Indian passport, which of course has its challenges with all his globe-trotting. But more seriously, Pavan is the founder director of Corporation 2020, founder CEO of GIST Advisory, visiting fellow at the Yale University, and former special advisor and head of UNEP's Green Economy Initiative. I could go on and on about Pavan, but importantly, the other facet about Pavan, apart from his green initiatives in UNEP and the TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, commissioned by G8+5 and later hosted by the UK, and he was appointed to lead this project. Pavan has been an international banker of many years. He was with Deutsche Bank for 14 years and then took a sabbatical to lead two major environmental projects which I mentioned, TEEB and UNEP's Green Economy Initiative. While at Deutsche Bank in India, Pavan founded and later chaired the Global Market Center Mumbai, the division's global front office offshoring vehicle, the GMC Mumbai, a dedicated global hub for global markets. Earlier assignments at Deutsche Bank included being COO of the bank's Global Emerging Markets business in London, and as head of money markets of Asia Pacific later in Singapore. Or was it earlier? Earlier in Singapore. Pawan chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Ecosystems and Biodiversity 2009 to 11 and was a speaker at Davos in 2011 and 2010 and 11. He serves on the boards of Conservation International, a leading conservation NGO, and Stockholm Resilience Center, a world leader in research on ecosystems and biodiversity. Environmental Finance selected Pawan as their Personality of the Year in 2010. The Institute of Ecology and Environment Management, IEEM, have awarded Pawan their 2011 medal. After Corporation 2020 is out and the book launch, global book launch starts in September, Pawan plans to grow his new consulting collaborative GIST advisory into a world-class provider of environmental risk and life cycle assessments, as well as green accounting for governments and corporations. Ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure in presenting to you Mr. Pawan Sukhdev.
Introduction to me, to many things. But I must also mention that yesterday here in Kolkata, we launched my book before its global launch, which is called Corporation 2020. Kolkata was also the first city where I worked as a banker. So in that sense, I think my life has come full cycle. So we're starting with my new life here again. Today I want to talk to you about water, but with a couple of perspectives in mind, and bearing in mind that we have had some outstanding presentations and coverage this morning. I don't want to try and repeat what was said, but focus perhaps on two or three key issues. One is on the supply side. The other is on the issue of equity. The third is on solutions that work on the ground in small scale. And the fourth is on my current passion, which is fixing the problems in the private sector, because I do not today anymore believe that with today's corporation, which is not a green corporation on average, we cannot have a green economy. The private sector is 60% of GDP, 70% of global employment, and a huge contributor to taxes to the government. No surprise, therefore, that politicians always look over their shoulder to the corporation for guidance as to where to go. And unless we fix the way in which the corporate sector operates, which is basically private profits and public losses, we are not going to be able to have a green economy. So all the work that I have done for the last 15 years would be wasted because we are not fixing the agent that causes and can solve the problem. So with this perspective, I just want to offer some thoughts on what I call resourceful water, and talk also about the linkages, as the BCCI has requested, between water, energy, and sanitation, and some of the issues of water management in a green economy, the costs and the benefits. Firstly, as it has been pointed out this morning, there is a huge demand-supply gap in freshwater. Freshwater is a flow, it's not a stock. So the demand-supply gap is actually entirely a management gap. It's a question of where the water comes from, understanding that, capturing it appropriately, using it sensibly, using it carefully. And that gap is widening, and the group called the Water Resources Group did an estimate some time back that by 2030, that's only 20-odd years ago, 20-odd years later, we are going to have a gap which is almost 40%. And this is serious for reasons beyond the challenge of increasing efficiency, because Pinaki, I know you mentioned that, we sort of, I think your words were, we take water as being available for eons and it will never change. But the worry that I have is that that assumption may also be challenged, because we are changing what forms the supply side so significantly around the globe, thanks to our impact on ecosystems, that the 4,200 billion meter cubes of water that we assume or take for granted will not be taken for granted. It may change, its flow will become disrupted, more volatile, And we are therefore having to face with those risks as well. And this is, of course, a global problem, but particularly it will be also an India problem. Adding the two dimensions of scarcity together actually gives us an interesting way of looking at it. Most of what we worry about is what is known as physical water scarcity, which means just not having enough there because we just don't seem to have managed it properly. But when we look at the other dimension, which is economic water scarcity, which means ensuring water in the hands of the poor for their day-to-day needs, and doing that in a way which affects basins and countries, there are huge problems coming up. Please look at this map and look at the colors there. Yes, we are aware of the physical scarcities that are there in the Gobi Desert, in parts of India, South Africa, bits of Australia, Mexico, and of course, across sort of Central Asian regions. But what we don't perhaps focus enough on is even in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is forest cover, where there is good groundwater, there is economic water scarcity. Getting to the water for people who need it, that's not as easy as some would make out. And both these dimensions of scarcity need to be thought through. India has been well commented on by previous speakers, so I won't say much except to say that we are not an exception to the rule. In fact, we are probably at the far end. The overall group estimate for India's water scarcity increase, the gap, so to speak, was almost 50% over this period, going from where it is now to 2030. And of course, yes, agriculture is the key cause. Some basins are affected more than others. Some basins will be affected more than others. For anyone who's looking at this map here and looking at the white parts of Kashmir, where I come from, or the northeast, that's not China. That is just politically correct. That is India. But interestingly, those are the bits where we do not have an expectation of water scarcity. In fact, there's a surplus. And it's no surprise that politics has focused on that. And some of you may be aware of long-standing issues between India and China, which seem to be going in their direction right now, because guess what? These are especially in the northeast, where their eyes are on water supply. Which brings me to my point again, that we really need to focus on supply. Because if we look at the main causes of water scarcity, some are well commented on. Population is increasing, therefore use increases. Our living standards are going up as GDP grows, as our consumption grows, as consumerism rather transcends into regions and countries and economies where it has not been prevalent, and that includes India. That footprint increases. Pinaki, you talked about this huge footprint of consumption, and people don't realize that a cup of tea is 35 liters, or a glass of milk, innocent though it may seem, is 1,000 liters. 1 kilogram of beef is 15,000 liters. And that's one good reason for not having beef. I have turned vegetarian as a result of all this science. But these are the realities. And unfortunately, as living standards increase, people consume more beef, more milk, more etc. And therefore, that increases the footprint. Thirdly, of course, is the overexploitation of water sources, and a dimension which I will cover when we talk about waste, which is pollution and its impacts. Anyone in Calcutta and familiar with the tanneries is not unaware of water pollution and how serious it can be. And the last one, the fifth one, which is what I consider really most important and most neglected, is the degradation of ecosystems, because the supply side matters. So here is a picture which I'd like you to look at for a few moments on what the supply side is about. It's the rain that reaches the earth, and this is a global picture of those 110,000 cubic kilometers that comes through. That rainwater, more than half of that, 56%, actually re-evaporates from ecosystems. And most of what comes through at some point, whether it's fast or slow, or whether it's flowing at 1/7 the speed or not, will go back to the oceans, 36% of that. But it's the balance, 8% of water that we, humanity, is actually using. And this is the flow that we are trying to capture. This is the flow that we are trying to be efficient about using. And of course, as has been said earlier, 70% of that flow is basically for agriculture. And the balance, hardly a fraction of a percent, is what is being used by cities and industries. So if we are not able to do this, then it is a serious management challenge. If we are not able to meet this flow requirement for the future, it is truly a tragedy as I see it, because for a human race which is supposed to be intelligent, it should not be that difficult, capturing better, using better, more efficiently, and with less waste, this amount of the total flow of annual fresh water. So why are the reasons we are so bad at this? And I think the reasons are also part of the connected reasons in the other sectors of the economy, which is energy and sanitation and waste. And I think I'd like to comment on a few numbers in that sense. Water is a really important part in generating energy. I don't unfortunately have the numbers for India, but if we look at USA and China, 40 and 30% of the power of the water is industrial water is actually used for power station cooling. And there are many parts of the world where the total water sector is a massive consumer of energy. So I think there are these links which we need to be aware of and be conscious of, because one scarcity in one area can lead to and affect scarcity in the other area. The other side of the linkages is that we invariably don't recognize how much we dump in water. It is said that some civilizations die because of their fixation with using freshwater bodies and rivers for waste as against land for waste. If today's statistics are any sign, then we seem to be that kind of society, and on a global scale. Because here we are talking about dumping heavy metals, solvents, toxic sludge, etc. in water, freshwater bodies, and in rivers in excess of 300 million tons per annum. We're talking about still in the developing world dumping 70% of waste untreated into fresh water. And organic pollutants, of course, are significant. It's not just food, but also the other industries. So we still have a significant challenge here in terms of changing the manner in which we treat waste, or don't treat waste in most cases, before it reaches, sadly, the very fresh water which is going to be used by our industry, by our agriculture, and by our cities. Now I come to Sunita's terrain, if you like, which is sanitation and excreta and the human side of waste. And point out firstly how bad it is in terms of providing sanitation as a basic form of health care to most of the people in the world. This number of 2.6 billion was supposed to go down as a percentage. And we are part of the so-called Millennium Development Goals was a goal which said that we're going to reduce the number of people who don't have proper sanitation from 46% of the planet's population to 23% of the planet's population. Sadly, that is the one important MDG, Millennium Development Goal, that we are not going to meet, because it is going to be short by almost 1 billion people. It is not going to be possible to meet it by 2015. And this has, of course, humanitarian implications that anyone would accept. It also has health implications, which also has, therefore, cost implications. It has huge implications in terms of global labor productivity. Several hundred million man-days are lost as a result of the health impacts of improper sanitation. And vice versa, if we invested in it, we could get some of those lost labor days back. And the costs are not small. They are just two estimates which I use. Unfortunately, I don't have the Indian numbers for this, but the annual economic impacts of inadequate sanitation have been computed for several countries. And here are the kind of numbers we are talking about: 6 billion in Indonesia, 1.5 billion in the Philippines. These are not small by any measure. Now I bring in again the point about sanitation and poverty, and the fact that it is another dimension of poverty to not have sanitation, because if we look at a continent, sub-Saharan Africa in this case, we find that it's not just that there is less sanitation, but in fact it is more acute for the poorest sectors in society. And this is a study that is part of the UN Millennium Development Report that came out recently, which showed that in fact, even though the richest quintile, that is the top 20%, 77%, you would say the majority, therefore, have improved sanitation in sub-Saharan Africa. In the same region, 63% of the lowest quintile do not have it. And that, I think, is the key point. When we talk about a green economy, to me, a green economy is one which delivers human well-being, which increases social equity, which means narrows the gap between the rich and the poor, and at the same time does so without increasing environmental risks, such as the risks of climate change or the risks of higher pollution, and without adding to ecological scarcities, such as the scarcity of fresh water. And that's what a green economy is supposed to do. And those of you who are familiar with this will know that the purpose of the green economy is to deliver sustainable development. And that, of course, is something that we have been talking about for the last 25 years now in global forums. It still doesn't seem to get there. But not having a green economy is a problem because no one would actually disagree with this. Who would want, in this room, please, who would want to have an economy which does not increase human well-being, does not increase social equity, in other words, adds to the gaps between the rich and the poor, worsens the environment and worsens scarcity? Please raise your hands. Who would like that kind of economy? Nobody. Unfortunately, that is exactly the kind of economy that you have today. That is exactly what is happening here. Rich-poor gaps are widening, well-being is declining, scarcities are increasing on the ecology, and environmental risks are getting worse. So all of you have economies, not just you in India, but most countries that I have visited, have economies that you don't actually want. And yet, you're stuck with it. You seem to be stuck in a non-green economy. And I think the reasons for that are many, and we've gone into that in the UN report that I was privileged to lead, but the importance of water and energy, and especially the areas that I think are today's topics, are really key in delivering that kind of economy. So what are the avenues? Where can we work? Where is work required? I think we need to invest not just in physical infrastructure when we talk development, but also in ecological infrastructure, which means if we know that the role of ecosystems, the role of healthy ecosystems in capturing and providing fresh water in a manageable way is so strong, that is ecological infrastructure. That those forests, those wetlands, those lakes, those rivers are able to provide you with the security of freshwater supply, which makes us think sometimes that it's permanent. It's not, but it's providing us there. That infrastructure needs investment as much as roads and bridges and railways. Please invest in those. Where we don't recognize the economic importance of the flows of these services to us, we tend to degrade them. We use nature because it's valuable. We lose nature because it's free. And invariably it is free, and Mother Nature is typically providing a lot that unfortunately doesn't get recognized. GDP doesn't capture it. Corporate profits and losses don't capture it. And we don't have the sense that we need to pay and reward good custodians of nature's services. But we should. Very often they are the poorest people. The poorest people on the earth tend to live on what I call the richest lands because they are the ones that provide the most to society. Do we reward them for that? No. So these are the issues that we need to start working into the systems. Of course, we need to improve, and I think I can't add to what Sunita and the others have said in terms of managing sanitation better, managing drinking water supply better. And we do definitely need to invest, as has been said already, in small and local water supply solutions. And we need to address non-traditional sources and basically work towards efficiency, being able to produce more food, not just in India, but this is a global issue, but certainly looking at the numbers, Pinaki, that we produce, clearly India seems to have quite a sad form of leadership in that space in terms of inefficiency in water use. We need to get focused on that. That makes a huge difference. Flows will change, and I do worry about flows declining, but at least let us use those flows better than being at 40% of the efficiencies of other countries competing for the same space. Let me then go on to some of the heartwarming stories, because there are solutions. And I will caveat this by saying that I've come across in the work for the Green Economy report and the work I've done on the economics of ecosystems, I've come across actually a number of heartening success stories. But the sad thing is that I don't see enough visible evidence of these being replicated in different parts of the world or the country. And I don't see enough visible evidence of scaling, which means taking them away from being small and great to being actually big and great. I think these are the issues that we need to work on. But there are good examples. And right from here in India, in Hiware Bazar, which is in Maharashtra, actually, is an area where cotton grows and which is actually has been affected by farmer suicides and so on. So it's particularly heartening to see a positive story coming from the same region. Maharashtra had Adarsh Gaon Yojana program, and that has, through regular effort in rebuilding stormwater capture, building small earthen dams, and doing small labor works in and around the fields, has improved water availability and groundwater levels to such an extent that the effective irrigated area has increased threefold in and around that village. And in addition to that, the panchayat, by the way, this was driven by local management, and the panchayat has also added to some effective management in a simple, straightforward way, setting aside priorities for the water. And if you measure it by the World Bank standards, although challenging whether that's a good or bad standard, but certainly poverty has declined. And in fact, one story about Hirevazar called it the so-called millionaire's village. What that means is the average farmer there was worth more than 10 lakhs in terms of his properties. But anyway, the point is this is possible. But unfortunately, it's not happening often enough. Once again, this is about focusing on the supply side, ensuring that the capture, ensuring that the focus on ecosystems, on building biomass, on building water capture through nature is possible, can be done, has been done, and actually demonstrates results. But how often do we do this? I think that's the issue. In a more developed context, people have started working on what I call payments for ecosystem services, and both Avion and Vittel are companies who have actually rewarded farmers for changing their agricultural practices to reduce the pollutants in the water so that better water can be provided and feed their industrial manufacturing of soft drinks and other such. And they paid decent amounts of money, as you can see from this example that I've quoted here. There are examples even from city areas where there is, again, a huge problem because of poverty and because of the lack of availability and supply of water. Almost 40% of people in Western Jakarta don't have access to reliable water, and they pay as much as 50 times. This was a startling number. I had it checked, but it is true. Almost 50 times as much as the average residential municipal taker of water in the city. And of course, the answer is more of the kind of solution that came up, which is basically a community-managed system where a slum is provided not with no water, but with one supply, as in one place which is metered. So there is a commercial solution there, but 1 meter. Then it becomes the community's responsibility to use that water, distribute it within the community of the slum, and then pay for it, but from one point. So instead of trying to establish 350 meters for that small slum, which would of course be unaffordable and nobody would want to do it, none of which would be enforceable because everybody would steal. You just have one and then it works. So it's a kind of community-based management of metered supply in a city. More broadly, what are the benefits of investing in water? Some statistical work had been done which showed that actually if you invest in supply and sanitation of fresh water, the return on that investment is some of the most startling in the developing world in terms of sustainable development. We're talking about 5 to 12 times in LDCs and 5 to almost 40 times in developing countries returns measured in terms of the generation of incomes that you get from the investment in these systems. So therefore, there's clearly a strong economic rationale for that. We've seen examples of the relationship between increasing the drinking water supply and the direct impact on reducing child mortalities. We've seen impacts in Peru, for instance, where, unfortunately, because this wasn't done, the cost of spending on health was almost 10 times what would have been the cost of providing improved fresh water. And as I mentioned earlier, the Millennium Development Goals, especially for sanitation, suggest that if we were to focus on them and deliver them, we would have 300 million extra man-days as a result of less disease and less people falling sick. So labor productivity and output would rise. South Africa, which if you remember from the map I showed you, was one place where there was physical water scarcity, not just economic, physical water scarcity, has actually become a bit of a success story because of one critical point, recognizing that fresh water has a public goods aspect to it. So it is, of course, vital for agriculture, necessary for industry and so on. But there is a basic right to a human being to go to a river and drink. And if your processes and your management and your systems are such that you don't deliver that basic human right, then there's a problem. And South Africa has been able to build that thinking into an approach which has resulted in the population which does not have access to drinking water dropping from 30% to less than 8% now. And some of these solutions have been quite innovative, in fact, coming from directions which you wouldn't expect, where they had a scheme called Working for Water, which provides employment to people to basically remove exotic plants from the areas where fresh water is scarce so that old plants and existing foliage can take over so that the fresh water supply can improve so that, in fact, you can provide higher fresh water. the returns are way in excess of the costs of doing all this, and of course it creates labor as well. So there are some innovative ways of looking at solutions. Again, small, but they succeed, and I wouldn't be surprised if we try them out. There are areas here as well where they can succeed. When we talk about what do we need overall, the framework within which we are operating is quite complex in today's world. We need national financing arrangements and we need international trade agreements. One of the kind of not commented on aspects of the footprints that we talked about earlier is that as you have agriculture becoming so important, the use of water in agriculture, especially if you are exporting, it means that if you are exporting food grains, you are basically importing water shortage. And this is a big worry for countries which are in the space of food exports, because they are truly running a path which just stops. At some point, you cannot do this anymore. It becomes a political challenge and a physical water scarcity challenge as well. So we need to start worrying about reflecting that in our international trade agreements. The virtual water will not be virtual anymore. What I'm saying is that it will become actual water, actual politics. Capacity, enforceability, these are big issues. Without the right laws, there are places where people want to pay for ecosystem services and management practices, but they don't have the means of doing that at the province level or at the district level. There are countries where that is a problem, but clearly that's a question of institutional capacity. And likewise, for the kind of price tiering, Jakarta example that I gave you, South Africa example, is because the prices are tiered. The basic water is available for free for drinking. Beyond a certain amount, you have to pay. But implementing that is easier said than done. And finally, transparency and measurement and disclosure for subsidies, and especially perverse subsidies, and also likewise the so-called cost externalities. Which brings me back to my favorite theme nowadays, that if we look at all of these impacts, I talked to you about the impact on freshwater quality of industrial waste, massive. We talk about the impacts of Sunita is here, she's the best person to talk about, the drawing of fresh water for all kinds of purposes at the cost of local communities, at the cost of local agriculture, but without pricing that in and without paying for it. And this thing of using water as a free resource or a mispriced resource, but doing it on an industrial scale, really is part of what I call the cost externalities of the corporation. In other words, making private profits, but at public costs. The public, whether it's the local village in Kerala or whether it's a place in sub-Saharan Africa, which has a cost which it is bearing, but it is generating private profits for a particular corporation. This is not going to change, because we have created the corporation today as an independent being with full legal rights, but not the kind of social responsibilities that it used to have in the past. Today we are in Calcutta, which is the home of one of the oldest corporations, the East India Company. And what it did is also an interesting history. And we are also the home of companies like the Tata Group, where its founder said that the purpose of the corporation is community. So we do have a sense of understanding that social purpose and profits should align. But unfortunately, that's not the way laws have evolved. That's not the way business practice has evolved. To do that and to change that, we need to focus on micro policy. In other words, policy that affects the micro level. Without that focus, I'm afraid we are all just talking. So my last point is that it is today possible to start measuring, disclosing, and managing these so-called externalities. And here's a calculation that was done for 3,000 of the top corporations of the world, measuring their actual public costs of their private profits. In other words, what we call their negative externalities. And we can see that, of course, the biggest one is carbon emissions. But the second biggest one here is fresh water, which is the preemption of fresh water around the world across major industries like power generation, oil and gas, industrial metals and mining, food, construction and materials, and so on. The red color is water extraction. I haven't picked the colors myself. It just happened to be the case. But that's the worry, that there is so much of negative impacts measured in economic terms. These are the second largest costs to the public as a result of today's model of the corporation, which is that it can do business as usual, create costs for the society, and nothing changes, nothing matters. That has to stop. And the first step in stopping that is to start measuring it and reporting it so that investors can see it, the public can see it, NGOs can see it, customers can see it, and we can see it. I mean, the people, when they react to what is known, can actually form an opinion. If you don't disclose it, there is no way of reacting. How will you react to what you don't know about? And that's, I think, the key. Ladies and gentlemen, also please recognize how big these numbers are. Right? We are talking about $2.1 trillion for the top 3,000 corporations. Collectively, the private sector, my estimate was something like $4 trillion. We're talking about 7% of global GDP. That's how much corporate activity today is costing you and me, the public, right? Undisclosed. These are not costs which are disclosed. If they were disclosed, at least we would have a first step to move forward. And that's my point, that you must measure externalities. Today, the technologies are there. There are no more excuses not to do it. Let's do it. And that is the way forward. And the good news is that there are companies like Puma where actually the story is Jochen Zeitz, who is the chairman of Puma and the CEO, went about this because he was worried about water. His main concern was, this is a company that makes branded sports and shirts and shoes. It's using water because of the rubber in its rubber soles, which is, of course, huge user of fresh water, the cotton of its T-shirts and other shirts, which is huge user of fresh water, and its leather is impacting tanneries, and I don't need to remind anyone. I mean, anyone from Calcutta knows about the impact of water quality of tanneries. And as the CEO of the company at that time, he had no idea what the total impact of fresh water is to his company and the risk that it represents. So he was worried, like any sensible CEO should be, about the risk to the corporation of scarcities impacting him or of externalities becoming internalized. What if British Petroleum had invested that $500,000 that it cost to put the pressure sealant caps to prevent the blowouts, which they thought was a cost-saving device? Now, of course, the cost of that is $20 billion to them and another few $1 billion to the investors who lost on the equities. But we start thinking about externalities, we start measuring them, that's when we can start managing them. And the good news is that there are companies like Puma, and now I can share with you that Jochen Zeitz has managed to convince Richard Branson, who is the chairman of Virgin, to start doing this. And, of course, Rob Bolton, who is the chairman of Walmart, is looking at seeing how these numbers can be disclosed at the product level in Walmart stores. Log into my website, www.corp2020.com, and you will see interviews with these people. So there are a few companies which are leading the way. There should be transparency, measurement, and disclosures. There should be accounting for externalities, but we need to get this into the system. This has to become something not just that is done by a few visionary leaders whose total turnovers add up to like 2 or 3% of GDP, according to my back of the envelope. But this has to be done by every corporation. So in a sense, what we need is not more leaders, we need more followers. But to get more followers, we need to change the rules. This has to become part of what every company does, and not just what Mr. Jochen Zeitz, the great visionary leader of Puma, or Mr. Richard Branson has decided to do because he thinks this is the good thing to do. This is what every corporation must do. This has to be the way forward. That's what I'm saying today. I believe it is relevant, and I happen coincidentally to bring this to the table because I worked on this exercise and because freshwater was one of the main reasons why this exercise took place. So I leave you with this thought of hope. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Pawan, for a very insightful and sweeping, across the globe. He's shared experiences of so many countries and corporations presentation. Now, with the passage of each month, the Chamber's partnership with the European Business and Technology Center has actually broken new horizons and is moving into new ground. We are working very closely together on a number of areas, including the promotion and spread of clean technology, water and wastewater management. The man who has made it possible and with whom we have been working so closely is with us today. That person is Mr. Paul V. Jensen, Director, European Business and Technology Center. Mr. Jensen is a Bachelor of International Trade and a graduate from the Copenhagen Business School, Denmark, and holds his Master's in Business Administration from CASS Business School, London. His career started in 1989 at the then largest Danish conglomerate, East Asiatic Company, a shipping, transportation and distribution firm operating globally. Here, Mr. Jensen, through 10 years, held various roles throughout the value chain of the company, with postings in Australia, Denmark, Germany, New Zealand. This included positions in procurement, sales and operations, and lastly, roles heading the German subsidiary to become European commercial head. In 2002, he joined Transcare AG in Germany, a management consulting group providing international consulting services to a multitude of organizations across the globe. In 2005, he founded the group's business in India as Managing Director of Transcare Logistics India Private Limited. He has been influential in the Indian logistics and infrastructure space, developing innovative supply chain solutions for various industry verticals, infusing his best practice knowledge of international transportation and developing business plans for some of the recently formed private container train operators, as well as for several of India's major and minor ports. He has been instrumental in conducting negotiations and forging relationships with Indian and European companies in logistics, infrastructure and technology space. During his tenure at Transcare India, Mr. Jensen was a member of the CII National Committee on Transportation, providing research, impetus, stimulus and inputs towards Indian policy-making bodies. Since January 2010, Mr. Jensen is Director of EBTC, European Business and Technology Centre, a body focusing on 4 dynamic sectors: biotech, energy, environment and transport. Here, his main focus is the SME and research communities, and his mandate is to pragmatically execute the task of bringing European Union and India even closer together in their strategic and operational relations. This includes addressing challenges in transferring clean technologies, providing input for developing clusters, and for developing procedures to enhance collaboration on R&D and innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you Mr. Paul V. Jensen. Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roy, for that introduction. We're approaching 2 hours. I think we're challenging our attention span, so I will make this sweet, short, and succinct. I first of all want to thank all the previous speakers for incredible insight, brilliant detail, I must say. And it's a bit sad to see the challenge that we have ahead of us, because it's a massive challenge. We're standing at the foot of a very, very large mountain that we have to travel across or get to the top of. I had prepared a speech with also a lot of numbers and a lot of insight in this space, and firstly, some of it is outdated, so I won't do it now, because now there's a lot more and better updated information than I have. But secondly, I think I want to talk about an issue, a topic that relates to all what we've spoken about here. I agree with many of the recommendations and many of the results that have come out here. I think we do need a paradigm shift in our thinking and in the way we approach things. I think we do need to look at our policy and how we regulate this space, environment space, and including water. I think I'm absolutely certain that we need industry involvement. That was also mentioned. And we need to measure environmental costs, which was mentioned as the last point. As the director of EBTC, the European Business and Technology Centre, our mandate is, as it was told, to bring, and I think that's extremely important that we focus on collaboration. And that is exactly the essence of EBTC. So without collaboration, I don't think we will reach where we want to go. What I typically spend a lot of time on saying to European companies is you have been used to selling products. You've been used to developing products and selling them in a high-priced market. And now if you want to tap into an Indian market, which has huge numbers, everybody's convinced about the numbers. But what I'm saying is we don't know how to tackle a market like that, because we don't know the issues, we don't know the problems. And we're not going to be able to develop any technologies or any ideas in our, I like to call them ivory towers, in Europe. We need to come out here and understand what are the issues. So that's what I'm saying about collaboration. We spend a lot of time bringing out experts, so experts from industry, experts from universities, research institutions, and showcase to them here what are exactly the issues. And these are people, if it's a person, he might have been involved 40 years in Europe with water problems. We've had problems in Europe, and we still have. Dirty rivers, contaminated groundwater. And I say, why not use that and leverage that and learning from that? And I think we're doing that. But we need, what we as Europeans fail to understand is I would say, the fabric of India, and really understanding how do we develop something that is what India really needs. And we're talking, in many senses, all the people that are not connected to water grids, to electricity grids and so forth. How do we develop technologies that addresses those issues? So that is from our point, extremely important. And at the end of the day, instead of coming and saying, we have the best technology in the world, we want to sell it to you, I think we should turn it around and say what is actually required and how can we develop something that addresses those concerns. And we can't do it alone. We need to do it along with you. We need to have collaboration across the borders in a big way. And there's a lot of benefit. And when I'm in Europe talking and saying, look at the benefit, you're actually coming to a market who's willing to develop products with you, develop technologies with you, develop solutions with you. And those solutions might not only be interesting in India. You will have a product that could be interesting in India, but you're actually developing a product that could be used in other parts of the world who are facing similar problems, whether it's Africa or other parts of the world. So for Europe, there's also the benefit in the fact that you're actually, with India, co-creating products. You're developing products for not only India, but for a global market. So I also spend a lot of time in Europe talking about mindsets and about really thinking differently and developing business models which address another market than we're used to addressing. So I think that is, for me today, listening to these presentations, there's a lot of insight and there's a lot of impact that can be done, but we need to do it. And I think the most challenging for us all is exactly that paradigm shift. How do we develop from where we are today to really making an impact with the issues that are there today? And I think there's some brilliant ideas. And EBTC is a facilitator. So we're not in that sense a thinker. We're not at a political level. But we have to connect. We bend ourselves backwards to find out how do we find a new approach? How do we put systems and procedures and platforms in place to ensure that people are connected and talking at the right level? So that, EBTC is quite young. EBTC has only been in India since 2009. I joined in 2010, and I think we're making big strides. And we need a lot of partners. That's why we're partnering with the Bengal Chamber, and we have a numerous set of partners across India. Also, because we need that intense connect to India and to what's really going on here. So instead of thinking supply side and say we have this technology, we want to bring it to India, we are thinking what is really required in India, understand the problem as well as we can, and then go to Europe and scout for technologies that are close enough or can be adapted easily to address these issues. Now, obviously, it's easy to think in one technology or one product. What we've been addressing here today have been a lot of holistic issues. Don't think only water, think also energy, think also waste. And if you look at all the players, all the stakeholders in everything, it even becomes more complicated. But EBTC is a platform that is trying to address that and trying to be that space where the connect is from everyone. So I think from local problems, regional issues, to global solutions, and EBTC's umbrella, under which it all hangs. We heard, EBTC deals in biotech, environment, energy and the transport space, but it's all clean tech, and the political umbrella which all hangs is climate change. So there's even from that approach, there's a holistic attempt, the attempt to having a holistic approach. So what I want to say to this audience is that EBDC is a platform. So if you are facing an issue, if you are facing an issue pertaining to what we've heard to today, the likelihood of us knowing of a technology that could address that issue is quite high. So please do take time to connect with us. We're here in Kolkata, and I would be happy to entertain any such issues. And I can only reiterate, collaboration is the key to going forward and solving these solutions. No one can solve these solutions in isolation. So I hope I made up at least 5 minutes, Mr. Roy. Thank you very much for giving me time here, and I look forward to interact with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, this presence of EBTC in Kolkata should be leveraged to the greatest. All the MSMEs and companies requiring clean technologies, please do get in touch with us, and we work together with EBTC to get your project off the ground. Now, we have with us Mr. Sanjay Wadhwani. He has always been a friend and well-wisher of the Bengal Chamber and the British Deputy High Commissioner here, and one personality who has a great passion for environmental excellence, which echoes his country's commitment to climate change mitigation and proliferation of green technology. We present to you our very own Mr. Sanjay Wadhwani. Mr. Wadhwani's introduction was policy team charged with implementing part of UK's strategic engagement with China. This included working across a range of global and multilateral issues, close coordination across the UK government, as well as contributing to European Union policy. Prior to that, while based at the British Consulate as the British Consulate General in Guangzhou, he was responsible for the day-to-day management of the post services, including successful UK consular response to the 2003 SARS outbreak, which had its origins in Guangzhou. Sanjay also ran the trade and investment team, which successfully helped many British businesses establish a market in southern China and assisted major Chinese companies investing in the UK. In Santiago, he developed a bilingual online research engine aimed at helping UK and Chilean companies trade more easily and targeted opportunities for UK companies in the environmental and healthcare sectors. Sanjay has a strong corporate experience in the FCO, being one of the driving forces behind a pilot project related to the resourcing of the UK's posts in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as developing more efficient targeting of program funds in pursuit of government priorities in the smaller UK posts on that continent. He was awarded an OBE in the New Year Honours 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to present to you Mr. Sanjay Wadhwani. Please put your hands together. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Esteemed speakers, members of the Bengal Chamber, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm very, very pleased to see a number of students here as well. Very good morning to you, and particularly to the students who, much of what you've heard this morning, what we're talking about, the future of our management and proper use of water is going to lie in your hands. So, I hope that we can count on you in the future for the failings of today. I'd like to thank the Bengal Chamber, particularly for inviting me to attend again, the fourth year in a row. I can only apologise for missing perhaps the first edition of this conclave, but congratulate you as ever. You've heard from far more eloquent speakers and knowledgeable speakers than me this morning, so I too will cut down what I have to say and just try and reinforce some of the bigger messages as well. And in terms of water, I don't think you could have picked a more important subject this year. Earlier this week, the Stockholm International Water Institute published a report which warned that the world's population may have to switch almost completely to a vegetarian diet over the next 40 years to avoid catastrophic food shortages. Now, humans derive about 20% of their protein from animal-based products now, but this may need to drop to just 5%. And this report states there will not be enough water available on current croplands to produce food for the expected 9 billion population in 2050 if we follow current trends and changes towards diets common in Western nations. These dire warnings of water scarcity limiting food production come as the United Nations prepares for a possible second global food crisis in 5 years, with prices for staples such as corn and wheat having risen by nearly 50% on international markets since June, triggered by severe droughts in the US, Russia, and weak monsoon rains in Asia, including, of course, here in India. Some of you will remember that food shortages in 2008 led to civil unrest in some 28 countries. Now, many of us still, unfortunately, think of water as free. You know, we see it sometimes, if we're lucky, falling from the sky in abundance. But when the word water appears these days, as you've heard from all our speakers this morning, crisis, is really far behind. And we've seen from an earlier presentation comparing oil and water and the cost. And, many people do refer to water as the new oil, a resource long squandered, now growing expensive, and soon to be overwhelmed by insatiable demand. And, of course, climate change threatens to make problems worse. Climate change projections tell us that extreme weather is likely to become more common. And in coming years, that will mean water is expected to grow more scarce. And bringing supply and demand into equilibrium will be painful, and political disputes may increase in number and intensify in their capacity to cause trouble as a result. Access to affordable and safe drinking water and adequate wastewater services are goals common to all countries, but around 2.4 billion people globally lack access to sanitation, while 1.1 billion lack access to safe drinking water. Many countries have yet to develop an integrated, sustainable approach to water resource management. And if this trend continues, 2 out of 3 people will live in water-stressed conditions by 2025. So I hope, really, as I think all of us do here today, that we can work together to address the issue of water scarcity and look at sustainable solutions. Now, as you've heard, there's no one view, there's no one solution necessarily. But if I can just share a few experiences from the UK of the last few decades, where drawing on 30 years of experience of developing integrated water resource management techniques, the UK water sector, which comprises some 500 companies, over 500 companies, and employs about 80,000 people, the UK water sector now boasts an industry which is amongst world leaders. Privatisation of the water sector in the UK has been a success. There's been over £90 billion of investment to reduce the water industry's impact on nature and to continue to deliver high-quality drinking water while keeping water bills affordable. In fact, I think it's fair to say the water industry in the UK is arguably the most successful of all the 1980s privatisations that took place. We are now in the UK at a point where over 99% of the UK population is served by the public water supply. And maintaining supply without damaging the environment was one of the greatest challenges for the water industry, which it has largely successfully addressed and continues to address. And we've heard talk this morning about the importance of piping in water and particularly about making sure you take away the sewerage as well, and that's an extremely important thing. In the UK, which obviously comparable to a very large country like India, we're a small island with only 60 million people, but we have over 4 lakhs kilometres of pipes used to supply water to customers, and almost 4 lakhs kilometres of sewers return it for treatment. Particularly important, and what you've heard a lot again about this morning, is how energy intensive the water industry is, and that's very much true. And in the UK, industry has recognised the impact of its activities and the need to quantify, manage and reduce carbon emissions, and has proactively undertaken collaborative work to help industry tools, to develop industry tools to measure and therefore manage both operational and embodied carbon. And the water industry is also one of the first sectors in the UK to explicitly include carbon in business planning. So I think it's fair to say that the water sector in the UK has been at the forefront of changes in the global water sector, embracing a wide range of companies from large professional utilities to the manufacturing and service firms that support them. Expertise in a wide range of areas such as water purification, wastewater management, industrial effluent management, water recycling and recharging, and water supply. And the focus is always on continuous innovation to provide technology which offers better efficiency, a smaller carbon footprint, and at a lower cost. And particularly highly regarded, I think, around the world is the UK's expertise in designing regulatory and financial frameworks which can operate to the highest levels of environmental protection, quality maintenance, customer protection, and making water networks sustainable. And the industry does have considerable experience of working in partnership with governments around the world. There are already quite a few UK companies active in India, and while a few are scouting for opportunities to run water networks, the others are providing products and services in areas such as flow monitoring, effluent treatment, water management, arsenic mitigation, sewerage rehabilitation, and consultancy. And of course, Dr. Narayan has referred to a fairly common topic, I guess, over the last year about the government of West Bengal's wish to to turn, as it's reported, turn Kolkata into London. It's actually been misreported right from the beginning, and I should clarify, I think, that having talked to the government of West Bengal, their idea is to ensure that the services and management of the city are benchmarked with leading cities like London, and I think that's a reasonable aspiration. Kolkata, after all, was the third city globally to receive underground sewerage. We obviously go back to the 19th century here, but after London and I think Hamburg. So it's a long tradition. There is work, as you will all know, over the last few years to maintain and repair some underground sewerage that has perhaps been neglected over the years. But I think it's a fair aspiration for a city like Kolkata to have. The UK is also working with India together on research and development in areas like the changing water cycle, arsenic mitigation, water management, oceanography, and climate modelling for water resources. And in South Asia, the British government, through its Department for International Development, DFID, is involved in the South Asia Water Governance Programme, a 5-year programme which aims to improve transboundary water governance and deliver sustainable, fair and inclusive development and climate resilience in the Brahmaputra, Indus and Ganges river basins. The programme will focus on promoting regional cooperation and engaging a wide range of stakeholders more actively in decision-making processes at regional, basin, national and local level. And the programme will run from this year, from 2012 to 2017, building on the successful South Asia Water Governance Initiative. Australia, Norway, the World Bank and the International Centre for Integrated Mountain Development will partner with DFID in delivering that programme. We're not resting on our laurels either. As you've heard this morning, there's still much to be done. even in the UK, we fully realise that water supplies are already under stress in some parts of our country. Because of pollution and over-abstraction, only a quarter of our rivers and lakes are fully functioning ecosystems. And in the coming years, the combined effects of climate change and a growing population are likely to put increasing pressure on our rivers, lakes and aquifers in the UK too. So, there's much commonality there. In December last year, the British government published a white paper called Water for Life, and this white paper describes a vision for future water management in which the water sector is resilient. The white paper is our call to action for tackling water pollution and over-extraction, to make the water sector more customer-focused and support growth and innovation, and to change the way we use and value water. Now, underlying all of this, as you've heard from every speaker this morning, is a need to change attitudes and behaviour more widely. We all know that water is our most valuable resource, an essential of life. Abstracting it can damage the local environment. Delivery and treating it uses huge amounts of energy. We need to build understanding to help people the world over to value water more and use it more efficiently. It is not only the direct water we use from taps that we should think about, but, as we've heard again this morning, the water embedded in products we use. And I make no apology for just repeating a couple of statistics for everybody to take away with them, particularly perhaps our younger members of the audience. You've seen that each cup of coffee that we consume during the day takes something like 140 litres of water to produce, just for one cup of coffee. Now, in the UK, we use about 150 litres of tap water a day. But if you include the amount of water embedded within the products that we use, the services we use, in the UK, our water consumption is around 3,400 litres every day. And 65% of the water that we consume is in our food. So apart from that 140 litres of water we use to produce every cup of coffee, my figure says 22,000 litres for every kilo of beef. We've heard a different figure. Every kilo of rice that is produced, and I'm sure there'll be rice for lunch today, takes 3,000 litres of water. And the jeans that you wear away from food, if you like to buy a pair of jeans this weekend when you go to the shopping mall, each pair of jeans that you buy takes 18,000 litres of water in manufacturing, each pair. So I hope to finish by working together. We can share each other's experience, creativity and expertise that will benefit not just the water sector, but people in general, our appreciation of what we have around us that is not a free resource. There is no such thing as a free resource on this planet. And I hope that over the next 2 days, you'll hear a lot more interesting solutions and be able to debate those and go away with some new ideas. So thank you again for sitting so patiently through a very lengthy session. I hope that you'll enjoy the next 2 days, and thank you again for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vadhwani, for a very insightful speech. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the conclusion of the inaugural session. But before we move on to tea and coffee, I'll request Mr. Arun Kumar Mukherjee, Chairperson of the Energy and Environment Committee of the Bengal Chamber, to please present a formal vote of thanks. Thereafter, we'll have a short break for tea. As you all realize, we have a heavy agenda ahead and we are running late. So if you wish to sort of have lunch not too late, I'll request that we reconvene in about 10 minutes. Please finish the tea quickly. Now I give you Mr. Arun Kumar Mukherjee.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to be able to offer a formal vote of thanks to our distinguished speakers on the dais who have made it such a memorable occasion and given us a truly fantastic start. Our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Sunita Narayan, Dr. and Mr. Pavan Sukhdev for being with us this morning and flying down in spite of their so many other commitments and inspiring us to do so much more. Your addresses have created entirely new perspective for us. I would like to thank Sri S. Narsingh Rao, who is a champion for the green economy and who made it a point to be with us this morning in spite of his board meeting. His unstinted support has strengthened us greatly in our endeavor. Mr. Paul V. Jensen has always stood with us and by us, and it is not often that we are gifted with such a strong partnership between organizations from two nations. Mr. Sanjay Wadhwani has been with us in this conclave ever since he has been in Kolkata, and we missed you for the first program. And we cannot think of bringing this to you all without Mr. Wadhwani addressing us. He is passionate about sustainable development and his country leads by example. Mr. Pinaki Bhaduri and his team have painstakingly put together a wonderful but a very appropriate conclave paper, and we would like to thank him for lending us his domain knowledge and enabling us to put together this conference. Our thanks to our delegates from the industry, the government, academia, researchers, NGOs, and our friends from the media who have year after year reposed their faith on the conclave as a genuine forum for knowledge and best practices sharing, which, with your continued patronage, is evolving into a forum for policy advocacy. Most importantly, we would never have been able to make this a sustainable conclave and one which is a must-attend do for all stakeholders in the energy environment arena in the region, had it not been for the support of our corporate sponsors, Coal India, EMTA, CESC, Exide, WBSE, DCL, Rohit Ferrotech, who have kept their faith on us year after year, and we can only thank them from the bottom of our hearts for being with us so long. We are immensely grateful to Bengal's very own MPS group, which is bringing to board a number of new and far-reaching ventures for coming forward so readily with their support this year. We also thank our stalwart corporate members, MacLeod Russell and Williams and Meagher, JSW, Tata Metallics, and TIL, who always shared the Chamber's vision that in the new environment of society, industry, and business, the need for corporate is to internalize the sustainable development and demonstrate their responsibilities to the society. The same is true for ATE, which is coming all the way from Pune. We thank you very much. I am reminded of a statement by the legendary Rachel Louise Carson, the American marine biologist and conservationist, whose book, Silent Spring, and other writings are credited with advancing the global environment movement. She said, "In an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind even to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become the victim of his indifference." Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that with your participation, suggestions, and wholehearted involvement, we shall be able to transform this indifference into a spirit of action. Before I conclude, we have a very pleasant task to perform. May I request my colleague, Mr. Sutanu Ghosh, co-chairperson of the Energy and Environment Committee, to present our tokens of appreciation to the speakers. Mr. Pavan Sukhdev. Mr. Pinaki Bhaduri. Mr. Wadhwani. Mr. Jensen. and Dr. Sunita Narayan.
I really didn't mean to make it ladies last. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we break for the tea, and we would request you to come back as fast as...
Born on 15th December 1958 in Kolkata, Sutanu Ghosh obtained his Bachelor of Technology in Civil Engineering with first-class honours from IIT Kharagpur in 1981 and Masters of Science in Environmental Engineering from Louisiana State University, USA in 1983. After working for a year and a half with Messrs. Roy F. Weston Inc., Westchester, USA, he turned to Kolkata and joined Messrs. Ghosh, Bose and Associates Private Limited, GBPL. He is presently Managing Director of GBPL, one of the leading multidisciplinary consultants of the country. His areas of specialization include urban environment management, infrastructure system planning, environmental impact assessment, water quality management, industrial waste and wastewater treatment and distribution, air pollution, environmental auditing, etc. He is a certified lead auditor for ISO 14001 applications and an accredited EIA consultant of QCI NABET. He is a recipient of Chi Epsilon Gold Medallion from Louisiana State University, a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers and member of the Institute of Engineers, India. He has many publications to his credit and has also presented several technical papers in national and international conferences and workshops. He is the founder and convener of the Kolkata chapter of the Indian Environmental Association and secretary of the Kolkata chapter of the Consulting Engineers Association of India. He has been a former chairman of the Environment Subcommittee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry and currently the co-chairperson of the Energy and Environment Committee. He is a member of the Managing Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He was a jury member of the Environment Excellence Award Committee, West Bengal Cleaner Production Center, an initiative of the West Bengal Pollution Control Board and the Indian Chamber of Commerce. He is a past president of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, East India Council, and has served on the committee of the Bharat Chamber of Commerce. He is a past president of the Rotary Club of Calcutta. May I now request Mr. Sutanu Ghosh to please introduce Dr. Ashish Ambastha. Mr. Ghosh, please.
Angora, thank you very much, but you're making my life even more difficult by, making that rather long, embarrassing introduction. We now start our technical sessions on the backdrop of an absolutely wonderful inaugural session. We are at ITC Sonar, one of only 2 platinum-rated green buildings in Kolkata. It is water positive, it is carbon positive, it is energy positive, all the positives that can come along in the environmental domain. And today we have none other than Dr. Ashish Ambastha, Vice President and Head, Social Investments, ITC Limited, to kick off our technical sessions. Ashish is a PhD in Development Economics from the Institute of Social Studies, The Hague, where he worked in the area of rural labor. He has been involved in the development sector for several years, working with grassroots organizations in many of the underdeveloped districts of India, where he set up and managed integrated rural development projects. He has also worked with ActionAid, an international charity, in identifying potential areas and NGO partners for their development funding programs. Currently, he is the Vice President and Head, Social Investments at ITC Limited, with a special focus on watershed and wasteland development, economic empowerment of women, and universalization of primary education. All these projects are located in some of the most moisture-stressed districts of India. He works very closely with identified partner NGOs to plan, design, implement, and monitor ITC's investments in the social sector. Many of you here do have on your desk the yearly corporate social responsibility report or the Social Sustainability Report of ITC. I present to you with great pleasure Dr. Ashish Ambasta.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for this very flattering introduction, and a huge thank you to BCCI for giving me the privilege of sharing ITC's experience in this August gathering. And a very good afternoon to all of you. The morning session was extremely, it raised a lot of issues connected with the issue of water. And what I hope to do in this presentation is to just demonstrate what is possible by even a single unit or an organization, a business organization, to look at several of these issues and find solutions to them. Obviously, in the largeness of things, these are very small initiatives, but I think if all of us were to do this, then we'll certainly, as a business, make a huge impact. What I will quickly do is to take you through ITC's overall sustainability commitment, because water stewardship is one part of our sustainability agenda, and I think it will give a context to our water initiatives. I'll try and do it very quickly because I know we are running short of time. I will then go to the water management approach that we have adopted, quickly show you some of the performance indicators that we have been tracking for the past 8 years through our sustainability report, and then finally take you through the kind of watershed development work that we are doing with our farmers, because agri-supply chains is very crucial for many, many of our businesses. In terms of sustainability, it is, at some point, I think all of us will realize that growth and development are not the same thing. Obviously, the pursuit of economic growth has brought tremendous dividends in terms of huge wealth creation, advancement in frontiers of knowledge, a globalized world. But all this has come at a very, very large cost in terms of the erosion of natural capital and in a growing inequitable world. These are global figures, but the challenges for India are even greater because we are clearly resource-starved. We have 17% of the global population, but only 2.4% of the land mass, 4% of fresh water, and 1% of forest resources. And despite so many years of planned interventions and economic growth, our record on the human resource development front is very poor, as these figures show. So it is our belief, and increasingly I think all of us are beginning to realize this in terms of the social unrest that we see, the growing the threat of Maoism in such great parts of the country, etc., that it is difficult for businesses to succeed when societies are failing. And therefore, internally, having examined these issues, we said we need to relook at how we see value in creation of value in our business. And therefore, we said very deliberately, we redefined our value proposition. And we said our primary purpose is societal value creation, which we'll do through the triple bottom line approach, which focuses on the consumer, the social, and ecological footprints of all our operations, which today is known as the triple bottom line. And it is our belief that if we do this well, then certainly the reward will be very robust shareholder value. This very briefly encapsulates how we are approaching the sustainability agenda. And just to give you, in terms of performance, we have been reporting our sustainability performance for the past 9 years now. The 9th report will come out this year. And we do report, and for the past 3 years, we have also been including it in our at our annual report at the AGM. And if you just look at the triple bottom line performance of ITC, this report is from our last 2010 report. In terms of environment, we are carbon positive. We sequester 2 times more than our total emissions, and this is largely through a very large-scale forestry program that we have. We are positive in the sense that we have created potential to store fresh water 3 times the fresh water that we use, and we are waste recycling positive in the sense that we recycle more waste than we generate, and this has been for the past 4 years. On the social dimension, both ITC, our business value chains, and our social investments program generate sustainable livelihoods for more than about 5 million people. And on the economic front, we have been at a compound rate of growth in total shareholder returns of over 24% in the last 15 years. So this just gives you a very brief overview of our sustainability performance. It is the details are given in the sustainability report. Perhaps some of you have seen it. To move quickly to our water management approach, it is obviously a very serious issue that was brought about in the morning session. There is going to be less water as individuals for all of us, and certainly for the industry. These figures were, quoted in the morning, so I won't go through them, except for this one map that I want to share with you, because, as I said, supply chains are very, very crucial for our business, and this map is, of special concern, because what it shows is that, barring the Indo-Gangetic plains and the coastal areas, almost 70% of India has been declared between moderate to extreme drought-like conditions. And this obviously has a huge implication for our farmers, and it has very important implications for agribusinesses. So what do? There are 4 major pillars of water stewardship in ITC. We said we will certainly concentrate on conservation by achieving the lowest possible specific water consumption through water audits, benchmarking, adoption of best practices, etc. We are also have set the very ambitious target that we will have zero discharge from almost all our units through both treatment and recycling. We will also, this figure I have shown, but we would certainly want to create a water positive footprint through rainwater harvesting, both within the fence and outside with our farmers. And as I mentioned, since agriculture is very, very important for our business, we are working very closely with our farmers to ensure water resources development to stabilize their production regime. Very quickly, just some performance indicators. This graph shows you our one of our units, Bhadrachalam unit, our paper unit. I've just taken this example because just this one unit consumes 91% of our freshwater usage in the whole of ITC. And we have normalized this, taking 98, 99 as the base year. You'll notice that our production has increased 3 times, from 100 to 300. But the freshwater intake has, in fact, just increased by about 15%. And this is, as I said, due to a number of factors, which it includes water audits, benchmarking, global benchmarking with best practices, and adoption of technologies, etc. We do this for almost all our units. I've just given you the example of the single unit that consumes the biggest water. In terms of effluent discharge, we do this through treatment and recycling and harvesting. And we report, in terms of water audits, on our 39 units, which includes our production units, some offices, and our hotels. Out of these, in the past 5 years since we embarked on this, 11 units today are at a stage where there is zero effluent discharge in 2010-11, and almost all the other units are on the way to achieving this. A water positive footprint, this gives you a comparison between what is our net water consumption for ITC group as a whole, vis-a-vis how much of rainwater harvesting potential that we have created. And we started measuring this in 2002-03, which is when our first report came out, sustainability report came out. Of course, our performance in 2006-07 was extremely good. Thereafter, it has, as I said, we do store 3 times more than fresh water that we use. And this has come about in 2 ways. One is a reduction in our net water consumption through various methods that I had said earlier, and of course, the water harvesting that we do across the country. And finally, for our farmers, in terms of water resource development, we started this initiative 7 or 8 years ago. Today, we cover 94,000 hectares under soil moisture conservation, which these are farmers with whom we have been involved. In the case of tobacco for 100 years, but in all other crops for the past 50 or 60 years. They are enduring partnerships that we have forged. We want them to continue to prosper as they have in the past. And one of the major key areas that we have identified is water in this case. So 94,000 under soil moisture conservation, nearly 3,800 water harvesting structures, which today has created a debt storage of 2.9 million kiloliters of water. 92,000 households have been directly impacted. I'm not talking of all the, the indirect impact on farm labor, etc., etc. And all these efforts have also created 2.9 million percentage of employment, cumulative so far. I will go into some details of our water resource development work. The business context, as I've already mentioned, is that we feel that our agri-supply chains are at risk, because in almost all the crops that we are interested in are grown in rain-fed areas, which are inherently unstable because they are completely dependent on the monsoons. And the farmers are at the mercy of the monsoons, and so is the crops that we are interested in. In almost all these areas, we see a huge depletion of biomass, which aggravates topsoil losses because of surface runoff. There is therefore a very high level of soil erosion by both water and air, and therefore there is a long-term implication that we can already see actually on fertility and productivity of land. And therefore, as I said, it certainly impacts the farmers and it impacts us. And both partners have therefore to look at this issue very seriously. And as it has been emphasized in the morning sessions, climate change is certainly going to worsen these conditions. Because of climate extremes, variability and unpredictability, there will be all this will exert enormous pressure on fragile farming systems, which are already fragile, and certainly threatens food security for some of our most vulnerable sections of rural households. So how do we go about it? We believe very seriously and sincerely that this my baap culture, that I'll come and do it for you, will not work, and therefore we spend a significant part of any new project that we start in village institution building, because we really believe that unless you empower at the grassroots, empower the people at the grassroots, none of this is going to work. As we have seen, in the failure of almost all of these kind of public works, that the government comes and does it, but because there is no ownership, it just falls into disuse. So, as I said, we spend a huge amount of time, resource and money in providing training, technical training and other kind of training to create water user groups in the case of water. And this forum also is used to ensure that the planning is done by them, so that there is not a top-down approach, but a bottoms-up approach to whatever is being done, which creates huge ownership. And the other way that we ensure great ownership by the beneficiaries directly is by ensuring that once the plans are ready, they make the budget, and then we sit and negotiate with them how much of the total expense are they willing to pay, and then what are the other sources of funds that we can tap, including the government and ITC, of course. So as soon as I think the money comes in, it brings about great ownership, and that we have seen at sites on site when all these farmers who have directly contributed are there to ensure that the work is done properly. We do the entire soil and moisture conservation work in an integrated manner. I'm sure all of you know what this is, but catchment area treatment is on the upper slopes where the rain falls, and our endeavor here is, as the watershed experts say, is to make the water walk and not run, because the velocity of rain in this country is two things happen. One is that there is a silt load that goes off with it, and resulting in topsoil losses, and because of the resultant surface runoff, there is very little time for water to stop anywhere so that it can percolate and recharge groundwater. So there are various methods of doing this, and depending on the geography of the region, you adopt all these practices. To date, we have treated 61,000 hectares in this manner. As I said, we have created about 3,000 water harvesting bodies, from small to large. This is one of our largest structures that we have created in MP. It's a 40-gate structure. And these provide critical irrigation already to about 33,000 hectares of land. And as I said, the total freshwater storage created through all these is about 18.97 million kiloliters. And this is just debt storage. I was I was making the point that, the involvement of the local community is very, very important. And so far, as I said, we negotiate with them how much are they willing to put upfront in all these projects. They, in the past 7 or 8 years, the community contribution in cash, it goes into a bank account, and from there, they spend from there is nearly 11 crores. And the second most important thing that we do, and that again is possible because of the village institutions that we create, is to build up a maintenance fund so that these structures are maintained. Otherwise, they will start looking at the government or at ITC, and we can't do it forever. Watershed projects create employment in a very, very big way, because the work happens in the first quarter or the fourth quarter, which is when agriculture is at a minimum, and that is the time that you see small farmers and landless families from rural areas. The season of out-migration to cities and all who work on our construction sites starts then. And if you provide, if you have a good watershed program going, it is precisely at this point that you provide employment to this section, and so you prevent out-migration, and it has a very significant impact on the human development index of the family, including the children. Water is clearly life-saving for animals, and most of our structures from March onwards are the only source of water for animals. Otherwise, there's distress selling of animals, which is one of the, after land, it is the second most important assets that rural households have. And of course, it is a very, very strong gender issue, because all of you who are familiar, who have worked in rural areas would know how the distances that women have to trudge to get water, just drinking water, a couple of pots of water, and that distance keeps growing as the summer months grow. This is a very stark picture, but it does illustrate what water conservation efforts can do. This is in Prakasam in Andhra Pradesh, where once the irrigation tank dries up, they dig a hole in the irrigation tank bed and they get water. It just shows how precious water is, and also what a dangerous occupation it is for women to get water from these sources. Of course, conservation of water is one thing, but we also must ensure its judicial use, and therefore we promote what are called group irrigation for poor farmers. And here you see the impact of water. That is the irrigation tank that we have created, and downstream of these are the wells that get recharged, and water is brimming in these wells, and they have water in these wells until March or May or June, which was unheard of earlier in most of these areas. And we promote water use efficiencies through drips and sprinklers. These are all demonstrations, and the idea is that having seen the low intensity water use and still higher productivity, more and more farmers will start adopting these technologies. Obviously, on a very large scale, we can't promote this. So the impacts clearly are on the environment, on farm economics and social, on groundwater recharge, huge increase in biomass cover, because that's one part of catchment treatment. Farm economics improves significantly, and we track data from almost all our projects very religiously. There's increase in area under cultivation, double cropping regime, and increase in productivity per hectare. Per hectare. And all these three combined lead to very significant increase in incomes. And socially, of course, as I said, there is a seasonal decline. There's a decline in seasonal out-migration, which has a very virtuous impact on families who now don't need to migrate out. Going forward, a company, we interact with hundreds and thousands of farmers, and it is not possible for a single company to invest in the kind of money that is required in these. And we think that going forward, one of the best ways to do this is through a multi-stakeholder partnership which brings the private sector, the government, and NGOs together, harness all their special strengths into creating watershed management on a very large scale. We started this 3 years ago. We have already signed under PPP, MOUs to promote watershed development in more than 1.3 lakh hectares. And this number is growing. In fact, today we are in a position where we have to say no because we can't manage. But I think going forward, this is one very important thing that industries can consider. And one of the most important schemes that we have targeted is Narega, where instead of it being used for any, purpose, which perhaps might not have a long-term implication. We have convinced 4 or 5 state governments, at least in our project areas, that the NREGA money should be spent on watershed development, which has a very long-term impact on the local rural economy, as well as provides that 100 days of employment that is mandated under NREGA. So, as I said, these partnerships do matter because there is huge improvements in efficiency in project implementation, because you are bringing the government's reach and coverage, you are bringing the project management capabilities of the private sector, and the mobilizing skills of NGOs. I think the synergies that all these 3 players bring is tremendous. You also augment the total resource pool by bringing all these, and this I'm talking both in terms of financial and managerial. And the most important thing really is that you are bringing sustainable development, because what we do is we spend a lot of time with the local gram panchayats, training them into becoming effective project managers. And that, I think, is the long-term solution, because almost all development funds today of the government are routed through the panchayats. And if we can, equip them technically and managerially to manage these projects, I think a major part of your battle is won. So in terms of a bottom line for our watershed program, for the farmer, it gives stable yields at the minimum and higher yields certainly, with better quality, which is important for us. For the landless, it's on-farm employment, therefore decrease seasonal migration. For the nation, I think we are addressing one of the most pressing issues of water conservation and management. And for ITC, we get agriculture produce in the required quantities and desired quality. And of course, because of this, we have also achieved the status of being water positive. So as we say, we do have a passion for profitable growth, but in a way that is sustainable and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashish, for a wonderful presentation. The initiatives that are being taken by this particular company is really commendable. And my thoughts go to the earlier session. This could be a benchmark for, many other corporate houses to really follow to the extent practicable to them. Just to be fair to the presenter and the participants, we'll take 2 questions. Yes, sir.
My point is that your social investment program in water and other natural resources, have you been thinking about extending it to the agro industries? Because you have got such a beautiful management infrastructures. Agro industries, that means more employment intensive. You can make it than what we have done with only the agro resources. Thank you.
You can. Okay. Professor Dr. Sinha, please.
Can I take it that the socially, in your concept of and your practice of social investment, have you been able to identify the socially excluded people? I'm talking in terms of negatively, so that you ended up with the inclusive. To what extent that socially included group have been stepped up in your program? I would very much like to know from you.
To answer your question, sir, we are a large agri-based company in the sense that we are involved with our farmers in crop development, and therefore, introducing them to best practices in many of the crops that we are interested in. And we procure on a very, very large scale. So that connects our farmers to markets. We are certainly currently not directly in the area of agribusiness. But the important point here is that almost all the crops that we are developing feeds into our businesses, whether it's our food business, our segment business, or whatever it is. But it is feeding into our businesses. And in that sense, even if we don't have agro-processing units, the farmers are benefiting by being connected to us through the markets that we provide. And that the scale of that initiative is very large. Inclusive growth is certainly at the
area you are developing. Are they employment positive also?
Employment positive in the sense that...
Are there also unemployment in the area you have covered?
See, if most of our agriculture operations are in rain-fed areas, and rain-fed areas, by and large, because of lack of irrigation, just have a single crop, which is the monsoon crop, kharif crop. Before that and after that, people generally don't have work. And that is why from this area we see that pattern of out-migration, through construction sites, etc. So certainly in that context, if you are saying there is unemployment, and therefore the kind of, with watershed programs, it provides direct employment, not only provides direct employment on the sites because of the works that's going on, but as soon as the area under cultivation increases, the cropping intensity increases, demand for farm labor goes up, both in terms of peak season demand and in terms of the number of months of opportunities that exist. So inclusive growth is really at the heart of our chairman's agenda on development. And in every forum that he talks about, what he says is that, the entire sustainability agenda that we are chasing is being dictated by forces outside who do not understand and appreciate the importance of creating sustainable livelihoods within this country. And therefore, our entire effort, and that is slightly, that's why we don't call it CSR and ITC, we call it social investments, because what we are doing is that we are trying to tie up our social investments program with our value chain, because that is what brings scale and employment, etc., for a very large number of people. So we have a value chain from forest to our paper, from agarbatti rolling, food watershed is very crucially linked to our entire agriculture and food business. So this we are looking at milk now. So we have already started the process of setting up efficient procurement systems so the farmers benefit, and of course we have
How do you sensitize them for empowerment in regard to inclusivity? That's it must have been taken up that, but have you been able to identify that?
That is where I think the importance of village institution building comes in.
Sure.
Because unless there is one way that, okay, I have the money, I am technologically sound, I have identified this area where a dam can be built, I'll build it for you. The other is to actually take up, start a dialogue in the village. That, what is the kind of development vision that you have for your village, which is how we start actually. And that's why I said this process takes a year or more, and we don't have nothing to show on the ground. But fortunately, my company is, has tolerated this because they see. So, as soon as you start this process of dialogue with all stakeholders within a village and say this plan is yours, this vision is yours, is when the voices of women or scheduled castes or scheduled tribes, etc., starts coming in. And when we say that you have to make this plan, not only do you have to make this plan, but then you have to resource it also, is when you start looking at every section of a village. It's an ideal situation. I'm not saying we have succeeded everywhere, but I think this is the only way to do it.
I'm sorry, sir. Apologies. There'll be more space and time for networking throughout the course of the day over lunch and teas and coffees. Ashish, thank you very much, and all the participants for a very intriguing session, a marvelous presentation, and having completed this session, 15 minutes, we've cut. Again, you've talked about water positivity. This session has been time positive. Okay, and with that we end. But then it's my pleasure to present Ashish with only one memento and not twos.
Thank you very much.
I think we immediately move on to the next technical session, which will start immediately. Thank you.
May we request Sri Rajesh Pandey, Chairman and Managing Director, West Bengal State Electricity Distribution Company Limited, to proceed with the session. Sri Pandey, please.
Very good afternoon to all of you, my fellow panelists, Mrs. Ghosh, Mr. Mehti, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the Bengal Chamber of Commerce for giving me an opportunity to be among this August gathering in this technical session on water, energy and sustainability. We've had a very wonderful opening session where, distinguished speakers, including Dr. Narayan, Mr. Wadhwani, and other dignitaries were present. I was fortunate to be able to listen to Mr. Wadhwani. It was a wonderful presentation. After that, Mr. Ambasta has given a very wonderful presentation on how ITC has been engaging the local rural population in various parts of the country, being a water positive industry, a water positive organization. I really wish that many more such corporate bodies come into this sector and be more and more water positive. We are aware, I would not like to go into greater details, we are aware that water is a very precious natural resource, a crucial input to energy required for the growth engine which is driving our economy. Without water, the existence of our society, human beings, etc., would be very, very, we can imagine that it's just not possible. And it's often said that the next world war, we don't want any war, but it's often said that the next generation wars would be over water, over control of water, over control of water resources. Globally, the water resources have been depleting fast, at a very, very fast rate, and this is expected to impact lot many nations, lot many densely populated countries, including our